even the most non-technical amongst you will realize that radio was never operated by steam. So you might wonder why I have entitled this video Steam Radio. There's some debate as to the origins of the term, but little research has shown me that in the early 1950s television was coming in, and so its advocates had to show that radio was outdated. At the time, steam trains, which had been round for at least 150 years, were beginning to be phased out in favour of diesel and electric trains. So what better way for them to say that radio was old and outdated than to call it steam radio. This was picked up by the writers of The Goon Show and used to much comedic effect. But in my mind, steam radio also referred to some of the great eras of radio. I've mentioned The Goon Show, the comedy team made up of Peter Sellers, Spike Milligan and Harry Seacombe, and ran throughout the 50s. Not only was it great comedy, the sound effects were also truly marvellous. At the time, with arrangements between the unions and the broadcasting authorities, coupled with the expense, at the time really high expense, of recording tape, many shows were broadcast live and that would be it. There were certain shows that the BBC did choose to broadcast around the world, and so these were recorded on acetate discs, which were then meant to be used for one or two broadcasts from the stations around the world, and that was it. Fortunately for posterity, certain of the technicians who liked the shows took them home, and more recently these have come to light and are being preserved under the auspices of the Goon Show Preservation Society. I mentioned a little bit about sound effects. That was one of the great things of radio. Some people have even commented that the pictures on radio were better, which of course is a little joke, but what they mean is the pictures were better because so much was in your imagination. The sound effects people didn't have the vast array of digital effects that exist today. So actually, whilst the show was going on, quite often they'd be putting shoes or Wellington boots on their hands, squelching through trays of mud, walking over gravel, pebbles. They'd have miniature doors to slam, etc., etc. Some of the Goon Show effects were also assisted by the fledgling BBC radiophonic workshop, and one account is recorded of one of the characters' stomach grumblings, which were done to great comedic effect. Another show from the era of steam radio was Orson Welles' presentation of War of the Worlds, which was broadcast in 1938. So realistic was it that some people really panicked because they really thought that the radio was broadcasting invasion of aliens. Other researchers have said that the panic was greatly exaggerated by the newspapers, but nevertheless it does show that when the radio was the main source of news certain people could easily believe that what was being broadcast was real. That, to a small extent, is being picked up by the docudrama formats used on television. As we look back, we can see in many ways radio has gone downhill since then. You don't have so many of the great dramas anymore. Some of it's cost-based because more people going over to television. But the dramas don't exist. But some of them, in the early days at least, lived on by being transferred over to television. People of my generation will remember the Lone Ranger films. Those who are a bit older will remember the invitation to go back to the thrilling years of yesteryear, which was part of the opening introduction to the Lone Ranger on radio. The Americans seem to have hung on to more recordings than the British, so these are available today through various organizations and companies who sell them, and some have been uploaded onto the internet through sites such as YouTube. Of course, when it comes to copyright issues, these are periodically contested and they have to be pulled, but it does give the general public a chance to share in these great events that took place on the old steam radio. Rather interestingly now, as we transition over to the high definition television, some people are trying to dismiss the older television system, the one that we're more familiar with, as being steam television. I don't think it's really a fair analogy, because although the picture may be crisper, we're talking about a totally different presentation medium. My parents bought a television in '57, and one time whilst recounting this to my daughter, she looked at me and said, "Oh, what did you do before that?" I told her we had radio. She looked back again and goes, "But radio doesn't have pictures." Well, that's certainly true, but neither did we become couch potatoes sitting in front of the television for multiple hours a day. We knew the actual fun of playing outside, some of it in imitation of television maybe, as we played at Cowboys and Indians and so on. But nevertheless, we did have entertainment. The other aspect of radio that was very good was the full use of the talk show rather than the casual chat show, which has become the mainstay of daytime television. But that's also because of the expectations of viewers, but also perhaps because the broadcasters have become a little more realistic, because the BBC was very highbrow in its thinking. Basically, if you didn't like Shakespeare and opera, then you didn't really count. So there has been some liberalism, some change, but of course, as always, the power is with us. We have the off switch. But nevertheless, during these times that you want to learn a little bit about yesteryear, try just searching on the internet on the steam radio perhaps, or just some listings of the old time shows, and just get a taste of what used to be. And who knows, one day maybe you'll be listening to this on your old steam computer.